The first thing you're gonna need to do is install MySQL. Now I'm gonna drop the URL to this website on the description. So if you want, you can just read it here. It's dev.mysql.com forward slash or backward slash. I think it works pretty much the same way. And then you can say downloads forward slash MySQL. And it's going to take you to this page. And in this page, I want you to scroll down and click on go to download page. And you're going to get two types of installers here. And one installer is basically the actual installer, nothing extra. And here is basically everything. It's a lot of pre-installed things that we're not going to look at. So we're just going to jump into installing the smaller version. And here we'll just say no thanks, just start my download. And it's going to start downloading. Now, depending on your download speed, this might be slow. I mean, it's only 5 megabytes, so yeah. And we're going to click open. And it's going to take a while. So yeah, if you get that option, just click yes and wait for that to load. Just click yes again. And you're gonna get this window here. You're gonna get a couple of options here like server default, server only, client only, full, custom. I want you to go straight to custom because we want to pick exactly what we want to install. We don't want any pre-installed things. So when we click on next, we're gonna see this MySQL server, and I want you to click open all these folders, open uh, server. I don't know, it depends on which version of the server you want, but I'm gonna choose the latest version. And here we get a bunch of different files, and I'm just gonna click on any of these files really. Maybe okay, I'm gonna click on the latest one. And when I'm done, I'm gonna click on this arrow to kind of send that product here. It says here products to be installed. So if I click there, it's sending the file to the other side, which kind of shows me that that is the file that's going to be installed. And the next thing we need to install is, well, okay, we'll just ignore everything else and just go to next. Actually, I want to install something else. I want to install the workbench, yes. And the workbench is basically the graphical user interface where we're going to be writing some SQL queries. Or if you want to do some SQL queries, that's where you're going to be writing them. So I'm going to click on version 8.0.31 and I'm going to send it to the other side. Now I'm not going to install anything else after that. These are the only two files I'm interested in. And now I can see those two files. I can click execute to start my installation. Right. So now that it's finished, we can click on next. So as you can see, it says ready to install, and we can click on execute, and it's going to start installing these files. So everything is complete. We can now click on next, and now we should get ready to configure the MySQL server. So when we click on next, we see a couple of options here. We see this config type. We have to make sure that this is development computer because we want to make sure that the MySQL or MySQL on the MySQL server takes as little memory as possible. And also for this connectivity, we want to make sure that we leave everything as it is on default. If you want, you can change the port number to something else, but I will suggest that you leave it as it is so you don't break anything. And here you can leave it as it is as well. Now it's time to create a username and password. So actually create a password. The username is root by default. I think you can also change it. We'll find out. So for the password, you can give it anything. I'm just gonna type a very weak password so that I can remember for next time. And yeah, you can leave the user accounts and just click on next. And here you can say, yeah, standard system account, leave it as it is. Yes, grant full permission. Ooh, right. So now everything is done. You can click on finish, and we can click on next and click on finish. Right. So now it has now our workbench is ready. Now you might see this connection already here when once you're done installing, but you might not see it. So you can click on plus to create a new connection if you don't see that connection already there. So you can give it a name, local server, and leave the host name as it is. That is your IP address. But since we're only working in the local machine, we can leave it as localhost. And the port number is leave it has to be the same as the port number that you used when you were configuring your server. The root name, you can also leave it as it is. And I think that's it. We can now test the connection. And also it wants you to provide your password. So remember your password, don't forget it. So now it says successfully made connection. You can click on OK. Um, yeah, so everything is done. You can say OK, and you can see your local server connection here. So that is it for MySQL installation. On the next video, we're going to connect our Java program to MySQL. Right, so the next thing we're going to need to do is open our integrated development environment. So whatever IDE you prefer, you can use that. If you want, you can use NetBeans or Eclipse or whatever, as long as it works for you. I'm going to be using IntelliJ. If you're interested in finding out more about IntelliJ, you can just go on Google and search IntelliJ IDEA, and you're going to see the page and click on the first link and just download the community version, because the other version is gonna have to be paid for, right? So this is what you're gonna get. Right now we want to make a connection from our project to the the MySQL server. Right, we want to make a connection to the database actually. Right, so how do we do that? Now we have to go through a few several steps. Now also I want to mention that we are going to need to install one more component for our connection, but I want to show you how to do that when we run into an error. The first thing we're going to need to do is register our driver. So how do we do that? We say class dot for name. Now using class, which is a class basically, we can use the method within it called for name to register our driver, right? So we're gonna need that. Remember when I spoke about the component that we're gonna need in order to make our connection? That is what we're gonna be doing here. We're gonna register that driver, but we still haven't installed that driver yet, and we will install it. But before we do that, let's just do this. So this method is gonna help us do that process. And here we have to specify that driver, right? Like that. But this driver, we have to specify the full path. So um, we can say com dot mysql dot jdbc dot driver, just like that. And the next thing we need to do is we need to surround this with a try catch block, or we can just say throws exception. It's up to you what you want to do, but I don't want to do that. I want to surround it with the try catch block. And I'm not going to write down that whole code. So I'm just going to hover through this and go to more actions. And I'm going to say surround with try catch. And that will do everything for me. Then the next thing we need to do is, once we have registered our driver, so I'm just going to create a comment up here. register driver. Down here, we're going to need to make a connection, right? So here we've registered the driver. The second step is to make the connection. Now, how do we make the connection? We use this class called driver manager, and we can say dot and make use of this method called get connection. And this method takes in 3 arguments. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a string here, and I'm going to say it takes in a connection string, a username, and a password. So I'm just going to say connection string, or I'm going to say connection. Okay, let me say connection str. Actually, yeah, connection str. And we're not going to write anything so far. Next thing is the username, and I'm going to leave it empty as well. And the final thing is the password, and I'm also going to leave that empty for now. So all of these are going to come from the database, right? And the first argument we pass in is connection string, and the second one is username. The third one is password. Now, as you can see here, we get an error, or like a red squiggly line that kind of tells us that we have a problem. So we have to handle an exception here. So we're gonna have to do the same thing we did up here, which is surround with try catch block, or write throws exception there. But we're not gonna do that, right? So in this part of the thing, we are making connection. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to cut all of this and put it within the scope of the try catch block. Now that we have made our connection, this, if we inspect this, if we go and look at the underlying code behind that method, we can see that this returns a connection object, right? So we can say connection, I'm gonna call it con, and I'll set it equal to this driver manager again, dot get connection. And now we need to import this because it's not there. I'm sorry about, oh, sorry, I said connect instead of connection. I wanted to say connection, right? But yeah, either way, it needs to be connected. Now, I want you to notice what's going on here. When I'm saying import, it says java.sql.sql exception, java.sql.driver manager, or connection, whatever it is that I imported. It gets written up here manually. I mean, automatically. If you want to, you can write it manually, and you don't need to run into that error that I ran into, where I had to hover through this and go to import, right? Now, also, it's important to notice that you can also do this to avoid writing all of this manually every time. You can say java.sql and write an asterisk, and with this, you don't need to write any of this code here. I'll show you what I'm talking about. As you can see, I'm getting no errors here. With this, it's importing everything that is within the SQL package. So yeah. Now the next thing we need to do is using this con object here, we can say con dot, because now we've made the connection, right? Okay, let me remove this here and put it here so you can know where we actually make the connection. So we're making the connection here, and now we need to create a statement. And how do we do that? We make use of the con object to get a method in here called create statement. And this create statement will return a statement object, and we can give it a name of statement. So now we've created a statement. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to execute our query. And we make use of the statement object. So we can say execute query. And here we can actually pass in an argument, an SQL statement. So I'm going to assume that you know how to do SQL queries. If you don't worry, it's not difficult. You can totally follow this. So I'm gonna explain to you what I'm gonna do now. We're gonna get all the results from a certain table in a database, right? So how do we do that? We say select by this asterisk. This asterisk will mean everything. So we're selecting all the columns. So we say select everything. Let's say, for instance, there was a username column from that particular table that we're trying to get values from. We would just say username if we only want to select the usernames, and if we only wanted to select the passwords, we would just pass in passwords or password, whatever the name of that table is. Now we want to select everything, so we can say asterisk, and then we can say from and specify the table name. Now it's much safer to say to first specify the database name and say dot the name of the table, but I'm not going to do that because we've already specified the database. We will specify the database on our connection string, right? So we don't need to do that here. We can say select everything from um, demo. So the name of that table is going to be, actually the name of the table is um, it's dummy. Yeah, I've called it dummy for now. And the this will return a result set. We can call it rs, and when we click alt enter, we can import the class for result set. And all we're going to do is just pass this in a system out print line statement so that we can see what kind of value we get. Now this is not going to work, of course, because we first need to specify the connection string, the username, and the password. And how we're going to do that is we need to open our workbench. Also, you need to remember the username you used and the password you used for your server, right? So you know that your username is root, so you can just type root here. For your password, you can type in whatever the password is that you have used to create your server. And for connection string, you can pass in the connection string, and that would be, let me explain exactly how it works. You first start with JDBC because this is a JDBC, this is Java database connectivity, and then you say colon, and then you say MySQL. You're specifying the relational database management system, so you're specifying the database management system, and then after that you say colon // localhost. So what is localhost? This is basically the URL. So that is the local host. The local host is your IP address, but we know that we are making a connection to the same computer. We're not making a connection to a remote computer somewhere. So we don't need to know the IP address of the computer we're trying to make a connection to here. So we can just say localhost, or we can say 127.0.0.1. It's the same thing. And then we can say colon, and then we can say 3306, which is the port number, right? And then we can say // and then specify the name of the database, which mine is called demo, right? So this looks like it should work, right? If we go back here, just to double check the name of the database, yeah, it is demo. So everything seems to be fine. Now we're gonna run this, and we're getting an error because we haven't installed the driver, right? So now what I want you to do is make sure you still have your installer, right? If you don't have your installer, just download it again on MySQL. So that installer you use to install your MySQL workbench and all the other stuff, make sure you still have that, and then click on that to open it, and then just click on yes. And remember, we've installed the server and the workbench, right? So now we need to add one more thing. So if you click on connectors, that is what we need. So this is a connector for all different programming languages. This is .NET, this is Python, this is C++. We need this /J, which is for Java. And click on that and choose a version. Here I'm going to go with 8.0.31, and then we're going to click on this arrow to kind of send it to the other side, and click on next. We're going to click on execute, and it's going to start installing. Right, we're going to click on next. We're going to execute that. Once it's done, we can click on finish, and now we have our driver ready. Now it should work, right? It looks like it should work actually, but it's not working because now we have to do one more thing. Right, so the reason why we're not seeing that here is because we have to load that driver, right? So we're going to need to go to file, and we can go to project structure. We go to dependencies, and by default it's going to be here on sources. You can go to dependencies and click on this plus symbol and add jars or directories, and just navigate to where your driver is. It should be here on program files x86. Go down to MySQL, go to connector, and this should be fine, right? So now we've added that. We can apply, and when we click on OK, it's going to take us here. Now we can see that connector here on our external libraries. So let's just open our project here, right? And now let's run our application, and this error should go away. Now we have a different type of error. It says, okay, it's saying it's deprecated, but don't worry about this. Everything seems to be working fine. Now we get this string here, com.mysql whatever. It's saying, as you can see here, it says result set, and it's giving us the hash code, right? Because we're trying to print out the object, right? So if you actually want this to work, now this comes back as some sort of matrix, right? It's almost like a matrix. If you have never done matrices before, it doesn't matter. Just look up what matrices are. It doesn't matter. It's almost like a table, right? Think of it like a table. I'm not going to go into data structures for now, but just think of it that way, right? It comes back as sort of like I don't know how to explain this, but rows and columns, right? So what we want to do is print that data out on the console, right? So what we want to do is, first we need to locate or specify the column that we want to add, right? We have to specify the column, and also we need to run a loop to print out each row in that data, right? So how are we going to do that? We can say while rs has a method here called next, which checks if there's a next value. There's a next row, and by default it starts at -1, right? It actually starts at 0, not -1. Anyway, and then we can print this out using system out print line, and we can say rs dot we can say get string and specify the column name that we want to get values from. So there I have a column called name. If we go back to this, I just want to say select everything from demo, sorry, not demo, dummy. So this dummy table has a name and an age, right? So we want to get all those values from there. We should be receiving values like liko, onodwa, actually onodwa, liko, right? Because those are the values that are in the database. So if I run this, we should be getting two of those values here. As you can see, we get onodwa and we get liko. And we can say plus, sorry about that. We can say plus rs dot get string, and we can say age to get the age as well. So right next to that data, we should be getting the age the ages of those people, right? Right, so everything seems to be working fine. Now, the next thing we need to do is to close our connection, and we're gonna need to close the statement, right? So where do we do that? We do that here. We can do it here if we want, but I'm gonna do it on finally, and we need to close that con. But we're not gonna be able to do that, right? Because this connection belongs within the scope of the try. So what we can do is say con, we can declare that up there, and remove that connection. We can also declare statement outside. Yeah, like that. And we can close, we've closed con, right? Oh yeah, first we have to initialize it to null. So I want to show you why we need to do that. Here you see it says that con might not have been initialized, and that's going to actually give us an error when we try to run this code, because we need to first initialize it, but we can't just directly initialize it to this, right? So let's just initialize it to null. We're going to do the same thing for the statement, and we'll go down here. We're going to say statement close, and these will also have to be surrounded by try catch blocks. And we can just uh, say x.print stack trace. Now we have closed our connection, and everything is fine. So now that we have tested our connection and everything seems to work, we can get the data. We can actually remove all of this, because we're going to write all of that code in a separate package. So what I'm going to do is split all my code into different packages, right? So I'm going to go right click here on demo, and I'm going to create a new package. And this package I'm going to call model. And I'm going to create another package. And this one I'm going to call domain. So the domain package is where I'm going to add all my plain old Java objects, right? If you've been doing object-oriented programming, you should maybe have an idea of what I'm talking about. But if you don't, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go through that right now, right? And then I'm going to create another package, final package called views. So this is where I'm going to store the graphical user interfaces. And on model, this is where I'm going to store the database functionality, right? So that's where all that code that we've written here, that's where it's going to go. So on my views, I'm going to actually create a new file. So we're going to create a Java class, and we're going to call that login. And I'm going to create another class. I'll call it register. So remember, we're going to need two things. We're going to need to register students, and we're going to need to log them in, right? So I'm going to start by, let's start with register. We're going to extend the JFrame. And if you don't know, the JFrame is basically, let me import the class. Yeah, import the class. So JFrame is going to be the frame, or the whole window, a little window or big window, depending on how much you want to size it. That's going to be the whole window in which we will have our application, right? So that is the JFrame. So a class will extend the JFrame, and we'll add all our components inside that JFrame. And as you can see, automatically we get this javax dot swing dot asterisk for importing everything within the swing package, right? So the next thing we need to do is create a constructor called register, And in that constructor, I'm just going to say super, and we can actually give the title of the frame, right? The title of the frame can be register. No need to do anything complicated. And we're only gonna, I've decided that for this application, we're only gonna get the username and the password. We're not gonna worry about um, first name and last name or anything else. If you want, you can add all of that information and do whatever you want with it. But for now, for demonstration purposes or tutorial purposes or to make things simple, we're just gonna work with username and passwords, right? So next thing we're gonna need to do is JText field. So the text field is going to be how we're going to get input from the user, which is for username and for password. So we're going to say username, and we're going to use JPassword field instead of JText field for passwords because we don't want it to be visible, right? Now, it's also a nice thing to say txt username instead of just username so that you can know that this is a text field, right? And we can also say, I'm going to say password field for this. And now we also need the labels, right? So we can say JLabel, and we can say LBL username, and we can say LBL password. Right. And here I'm just going to create instances of all these objects here. For JLabel, we can say username, and for LBL, oops, that was a mistake. Should have started with LBL username. And then LBL password, we can say new JLabel password. Right? That's misspelled. And then I like to label, I will call these label instances. And these would be input instances. So these would be for all inputs. If we had radio buttons here, we would also add them here. So we'll say txt username is equal to new jtext field. Actually, I'm not going to add anything there. And for password field, we can do the same thing. JPassword field. Now we have our instances ready. I also forgot one more thing. We can say JButton. So that's for the button. And for JButton, we can say we're registering users, right? We can say btn register, and we can have a btn cancel for when we want to cancel the whole thing, right? So now we're going to create an instance of btn register and cancel. So we'll give it a name of cancel, and yeah, so that would be it. We're not going to add anything funny. We're also going to need to add some panels here. So we'll add something like jpanel, and we'll have a panel center, and we'll have a panel panel south, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to add all these components here. These components are going to go into the panel center, and this panel south is going to contain the button components, right? We just want to keep things simple. Now, what I like to do is in my constructor, I like to add these instances, or actually, I like to code the way in which I was taught in university. So, actually, I wasn't taught this. It was kind of a good practice. And then I would create another method here called set GUI, where I actually style my components and add them to certain panels, and also adding the panels to the frame, right? So also I want to say button instances, and here we want to say set. First thing we need to do is we need to set the frame to visible, set it true, because we need the frame to be visible, right? By default it's not visible. And we need to set default close operation, and we'll say jframe dot exit on close. Now what this will do is it's going to allow you to, or it's going to allow the application to close completely when you click on the X button. We can also say set size, and we'll just say 400 by 400. So as you can see, this is the width, this is the height. So next thing we're gonna need to do is add the frame, or the panel, sorry. We're gonna need to add the panel center, and we're gonna say border layout, and we're gonna say center dot center, right? And we need to set the panel south to border layout dot south. Now they're going to be positioned the way that they're supposed to. And then the next thing we need to do is for our panel center, we need to add certain components. We're going to need to add the text username, and then we're going to need to, okay, panel center, add txt password. Actually, what I'm going to add next is, or what I'm going to add before this is panel center dot add label username. I'm going to show you why I did that, why I'm positioning these a certain way. Now it's going to be label password, and then panel center is going to be text password. Sorry about that. Actually, it's not text password, it's password field. Right. So now that we've added all of this, what I want to do is going to say panel center dot set layout to new grid layout, because we want to make sure that this is positioned in sort of a layout, a grid layout, a 2x2 grid, because we want the label to be on the other side, the text field to be on the other side, the label to be on the other side, the text field to be on the other side, right? So I'm going to comment these as adding components to center panel, and okay, let me just do that, and setting layout to grid, right? And then here I'll say adding panels to frame. Right. So now we should be getting something here. I'm going to run this application. Actually, we're not going to get anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a main method right inside of this application. So as you can see, we're not getting anything there. So I'm going to create a great shortcut to write the public static void main function is to say psvm and then hit enter or tab. And then here I'm just going to create a new instance of register, and I'll call the set GUI method. And I'm going to run this application. We should be getting a frame here. And it doesn't seem like we're getting a frame for some reason. We'll find out soon enough. What did I do? Okay, doesn't seem like I was running the register. Yeah, I wasn't running register. Um, it's saying this dot panel center is null because we haven't created instances of panel, right? So we need to create panel instances. So we'll say panel center is equal to new jpanel, and we'll have to say panel south as well, jpanel. Now if we run that application, we should be getting our frame. There, yeah, now we're getting a frame. Don't worry much about how it looks for now. You can always style it later on. What we want to demonstrate is the underlying functionality. So what we want to do, we're going to add some buttons here on the panel south. So I'm going to close that, and I'm going to say adding components to south. So just want to comment to write a comment here, adding components to south panel and setting layout to grid, right? So this is what I'm going to do. Panel south dot add btn register, and we're going to say panel south again dot add btn cancel. So when I run this, we should be getting that there, but it's not going to look the way that I want it to look for this tutorial. Actually, I think maybe I can leave it like this. Yeah, let's leave it like this for now. I wanted to set the grid so that it can take up the full space here and here, but I'm just going to leave it like this, right? And what I want to do is reduce the height of this frame. It looks really ugly. I mean, I don't care much about how it looks, but at least I have enough OCD to not work with an application that looks like that. Right, so this is what we get. Sorry about that. So this is what we get. Also, another important thing to notice is that, wait, I'm going to close this. Also, another important thing to notice is you can actually set the frame to be not be resizable. So we can say set resizable to false. That way you can't expand that frame any further than it's supposed to be. You can't even reduce it. So yeah. So if I run this application, we can't resize, we can't do anything. This is also disabled, right? So this is what you get. I'm going to close that, and there we have our register frame. And as you may have guessed, our login frame will look exactly like that. There's nothing else that's going to change. It's just that they're going to perform differently, right? One is going to add a new user to the database, and the other one is going to log that user in, right? Okay. So now the next thing we're going to need to do is go to the login. And here we're going to extend JFrame. And here I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to copy all of this. I'll paste it here. I'm just going to create a constructor. Actually, I'm not going to create a constructor. I'm just going to copy everything. And I'm just going to change the register to log in. Right? So now I'm going to change this to log in. Set GUI. And we'll change it to log in. So now we have the exact same thing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to refactor the register btn. So I'm going to go to refactor. I'm going to say rename. And when I change it here, it's going to change this variable wherever it is in the program to the new variable that I'm setting it to. So I'm going to change it to btn login instead of btn register, right? So now, as you can see down here, we get btn login instead of that register, right? So if there's anything else that needs to be changed, I don't think there is. We should be getting the same frame here. But I'm also going to change this title to log in. Let me close this, and I'm going to run it again because I've changed the title to login from register. So yeah, just so we can know that we're now working with the login frame and the register frame, right? So now this is the login frame. Now that we have the front end working, now let's go to the database functionality. Before we go to the database functionality, what I want to do is give some functionality to the cancel button, right? So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to go here and we're going to say implement action listener, right? Because we want to listen for some certain events, right? So we're going to click. As you can see, it gives me an error or potential error or whatever. So it says here, class register must either be declared abstract or implement abstract method, whatever this method is. It's action performed, action event, which is the parameter of that method. So this is an interface, right? So if we go here, we can see that this is an interface, and we all know that when we, hopefully we all know that when we implement an action listener, we have to use the underlying method in that, the underlying abstract method in that interface, right? So we are required by law to use that method. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to write that manual. I'm going to say implement that method, and I'm going to say okay, right? All IDEs should have that functionality. If it doesn't, then just copy this code manually, right? But I'm just going to explain a little bit what it means, and I'm going to cut it. I'll paste it above the main method. And what's happening here, as you can see, it says override because we're overriding the abstract method. And here we have public, which is the access modifier, and we have the void, which is the return type. And then we have our action performed, which is the function or the name of the method, sorry, the name of the method, and the parameter here called action event E. We're going to use that for something. All right. Let me show you how we're going to use it. So we're going to say if E dot get source. So when we say get source, we're getting the source or like the variable name of whatever the value we want something to be triggered when we click on it, right? So there's going to be btn cancel, and we're going to say system dot exit and pass in a status of 0 as an argument, right? And then we can say else. That would be everything else, right? Or that would be the other button and not the cancel button. But just to be safe, let's just say else if e dot get source is equal to btn register. Now we'll add this functionality later on. For now, let's just focus on this, right? I'm gonna run this code, and this actually is not gonna work, and I'll show you why. So when we click on cancel, nothing is happening because we have to add the action listener, right? We have to say I'm gonna say add listeners. So we have to say btn cancel. We have to add a listener on this cancel button or this cancel variable. So we can say add action listener and pass in this. So this refers to the current instance of this register object, right? This register class actually. So the current instance, that's what this refers to. And now we're gonna run it. And when we click on that cancel, it should disappear. Yeah, it's not disappearing for some reason. Let's find out why. Okay. Mm-mm. Let me run it again. Yeah, now it's working. Right. So we're gonna do the same thing for login. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this code here, and I'm just going to implement action listener, and we'll automatically add the method. Click on OK, and I'll paste that code here, and I'm going to cut this, place it above the main method, and I'll change this from btn register to btn login because we're in the login page. And I'll register an event on btn cancel, or on buttons actually, because we're also going to register more. btn cancel dot add action listener this. Sorry, we're running register here, so yeah, I'll have to cancel that. So now we're getting this, and we can either register or cancel. And now the functionality for this is not working. This one, however, is working. So now we have to think about the next step. The next step is to add our domain, right? For our domain, we will add the plain old Java object. Now, that would be for handling in between functionality, like functionality between the database and or that's like the interface between the database and the front end, right? So here's how it's going to go. Think of your entities in your database. Think of the tables, or think of the objects in your application. What is the object in this application? It's the user, right? Is there anything else? There's nothing. For this application, it's only the user, right? So that's what's going to go into your domain. And also in your table, you're going to need to have a users table, right? So yeah, each object in the domain, or that's how I do things, each object in the domain should have its own, or like should have a table that corresponds with it, right? So I'm going to go to domain, and I'm going to create a user class, and this would contain string username and password. And also I'll make this private, right? Because we don't want anyone else to access this. And we also want to add some getters and setters here. I'm going to write that manually because it's not much. So I'm going to say private. Actually, I'm going to say private public because I'm trying to create a constructor. And I'm going to pass in string username and password. Actually, no. That's a parameter. And we'll say this dot username is equal to username, and we'll say this dot password is equal to password. That's your constructor, and then the next thing we need to do is create a getter for a getter for my username. Get username, which is just going to return the username, and then we'll add the setter, public void set username, and we'll pass in the username, or we'll get a username parameter, and we'll set the username of this instance to the username that was passed in as an argument. We'll do the same for password. So we'll say get password, and we'll return password, and we'll get username, or we'll set password, and that will be password. Should have copied this. We'll paste it here. We'll paste it here. Right. And the next thing is to add a toString. And you know what? I'm not gonna write that code. I'm just going to generate a toString. We don't really need to add a toString, but I really like to add toStrings because it kind of makes it nicer to test for testing purposes. So yeah, I'll leave the toString method here. Now we have our Pojo class already, right? And now the next thing we're going to need to do is go to the database and create a username, a user's class. So what I'm going to do, sorry, not a user's class, a user table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create table. I'm going to call it users, and we'll say, what are we going to say? We're going to say username. That would be a varchar of 50, and the password would also be a varchar. And you know what? Let's just keep it between 16. All right. And then we also want to make we want to add a primary key. How do you add a primary key? Sorry, that's not how you do it. Actually, no. Let's just do it here. That's gonna make life easier. Primary key. All right. So I'm gonna run this, and there we have our table created. And in our table, I'm just gonna add something here. So we'll insert into table users. Sorry, not table. We say insert into users values. A username, a nice little username could be ONO123, and a password could be password. And now what I'm gonna do is run that or execute that statement, and it should be done. And I'm also gonna add another piece of data, and this password can be, I don't know, this is just dummy text, right? So now if I say select everything from users, I should be getting all those values here. We're getting these values that we have inserted into the table, right? So we're actually going to run those queries. That insert query, we're going to use it when we register, right? So I'm sure you've already noticed that, right? So now we have some data here, right? And we're going to start by, I don't know if we should start with login or register. Yeah, we should start with register. Right. We should start with coding the register functionality. So we're going to go to model, and I'll say new, and I'll say user DAO, which stands for data access object. So this is going to be the object where we're accessing some data, right? It kind of speaks for itself. So we're going to create a constructor here, and we'll say user, what's going on? User DAO. And that would be a default constructor. Right. And then the next thing we're going to need to do is say public, and we need to add users, right? So what I want to do is I want to have a function that adds a user to the database and then returns that user that was added into the database, right? So I'm just going to say user and say add user. Now that needs to be imported, right? Because it's in a different package. So we'll import the class, this class here. We're importing that here in our program. Here, this will take in a user as well, right? And we're just gonna, for now, let's just return the user so that we can get rid of that error. And the first thing we're gonna need to do, if you remember, we need to say class dot for name, and here we need to pass in that string, right? If you remember, that was what did it say? It said com dot MySQL dot JDBC dot driver. So yeah, we're registering the driver, and then what we need to do, we need to surround with try-catch block. Right. And then the next thing we're gonna need to do, I'm gonna say, okay, I'm gonna write a comment that says register driver, and then next thing I'm gonna need to, next thing that I'm gonna do is make a connection. We'll say driver manager dot get connection. We add a correct connection URL or connection string, username and the password. But remember, before we do that, we will need to surround this with try catch. And we'll say that's gonna give us an SQL exception. And we're just gonna say SQL dot print stack trace. Or what I like to do is just say JOption pane dot show message dialog, passing null, and SQL dot get message, right? Right, so this will give us a pop-up message, right? This JOption pane dot show message dialog is just going to give us a pop-up, and it takes in two arguments, which one of them is a null for now, and the other one is the actual message that we want to write in that pop-up, right? And here, what I want to do is say connection string. Actually, I'm thinking of something else now. I'm thinking of adding the connection string outside of this method, because who wants to write the same thing over and over again, right? So we'll say string, we'll say connection. Now there's a reason why I'm writing this in capital letters, right? I'm gonna show you why. Because I want to make it a final variable. I want to make it a constant, because this is never going to change, right? It's always going to be the same connection string, same with the username and the password, right? So I'm going to copy paste that, and I'll change this to username, and I'm going to change this to password, and I'm going to make it private because it's only going to be useful within the scope of this class. And we'll say JDBC, and we'll say MySQL, and we'll say // localhost, or I'm gonna say 127.0.0.1, and we'll say // actually not // we're gonna say, I'm gonna specify the port number, and then we're gonna say the name of the database. What is the name of the not the the name of the database? That was demo, and the username was what was the username for the database? It was root, and the password was my password, right? So here, now imagine if we had many other methods here, of which we will have many other, another method here. We're not gonna declare these variables over and over again. We're just gonna create the method, here this get connection method and just pass in the values connection, username, and password, right? So that kind of makes things a lot easier for us, and it's also cleaner, right? So if you remember, this returns a connection object, and we'll call it con. This needs to be imported, so we say alt enter. Okay, that's not working. Let's say alt enter now. Now it's working, and then we can say con dot create statement. And remember, here we're adding users to the database, right? So there's also one more thing that I didn't mention, was that we can, oh, actually, yeah, no, so I don't have to mention that at the moment. So we can say statement, and then we can say alt enter, and then we can say statement again. We can say execute. We're not going to say execute query this time, because we are not going to be getting values from the database. We're actually going to be we're actually going to be updating values. We're going to be adding something to the table. So we're going to be altering it, right? Not really altering it, it's not the right word, but yeah, we're going to be updating that table somehow. It's either we're going to delete, or we're going to add, or we're going to update, right? So when we do that type of functionality, instead of just getting values from the database, we say execute update, and then this is where our the string is going to go, right? And then we're going to say, so this returns a number, right, which specifies the number of rows that were affected, right? If no value has been if no row has been affected, then nothing has been added. If a row has been affected, then everything has been fine, right? Everything was fine, actually. So we'll say insert into, what was the name of the table? The name of the table was, if we go back to the database, the name of the table was users, right? So we'll say insert into users values, and we will have to specify the values that we want to insert. Now we can't hard code that, so we'll need to do some concatenation here. I'm going to say plus plus, and okay, yeah. So here we can pass in user dot get username, right? And I'll explain to you why we're doing this, why we're saying user dot get username, right? And I'm gonna say comma. We'll do the same thing here. Okay. Now you can already see that this is kind of tedious to concatenate these things together. I'm gonna show you a better way later on, but for now, let's just work with this. So we say user dot get password, right? So now we're dynamically adding those values here, right? And what we can do here is we can check if this value is greater than 0. Yeah, if it's greater than 0, then everything was fine. If it's not, if it's 0 or less, then everything was not fine. There's something wrong that happened, right? Which means no rows were affected, right? So we can say something like, if OK is greater than 0, then we'll need to do something here, right? So what we can do is say j option pane dot show message dialog, and we'll say null. And maybe add our message here, successfully added, right? But I don't really like to do that. I don't really like to do that, because the reason I don't like to do that is that I want to handle my output in my views and not directly in my J option pay in my data access object, right? So if things were fine here, I'm just gonna return I'm gonna return user, right? Or else I'm just gonna return null. So if it comes back as null, if this user DAO here on my views comes back as null, I'm going to handle that error however I want to, or handle that output however I want to. So let me just demonstrate what I'm talking about, right? So now everything seems to be fine. We'll go back to we're working with registering your user, right? So we'll go back to register and we'll say user DAO. Also, yeah, another nice thing to do is make this static, right? The reason why I want to make this static is because I want to call it directly without creating an object. Now this gives me an error. Why? We have to make these static, right? These fields here. So we'll start with this. As you can see, now we don't get that error. So we have to make the fields also static. Now everything seems to be fine. So we can say user DAO.add user, and we will pass in here. What we can say is this user, we can create a user object. We'll say user is equal to new user. And as a constructor, we can pass in the username and the password, right? Now those will come from the txt username dot get text. So whatever the user enters as the input, and here we'll say something like we'll store it in a string. Username is equal to that, and then we'll pass the username here, and the second argument will be for the password. Actually, that's password field dot get text. What? Oh, we can use get text, but get text is deprecated. There's another one called get password, but that also needs to be passed into a string. I think that's the case. Yeah. Nope. Okay, string dot value of also works, but this is sort of the same thing. But yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, and then we can pass that password as a second argument. Now this object, we're going to create a new, this object is going to be created when the user enters those values of username and password, and then when I click on the button to the BTN register. Okay, when they click on BTN register, what's going to happen is this variable is going to be created, and this variable is going to be created, and it's going to get the values from the user, and then it's going to store them in this user object, and then it's going to store this user object here like this. We're going to pass it in as add user, and now this is where the magic happens. So we're adding the user to the database upon the click of that button. So we're adding these values here. If you go back, the username is going to be here. I'm sorry, it's going to be here. It's going to be set to the instance, the fields, username and password, and we can get the username. We can get the password, right? So here, if you notice, we said user.get username. So whatever has been passed in as an input as a field, remember that object is here. So we're getting that object here from the DAO, and then from there we're accessing the username and we're accessing the password, and we are using them as values of or as values in our insert statement, right? Not sure if I make sense, but try to wrap your head around that. and yeah, you'll be fine. So everything seems to be fine. If I run this, actually, no, first want to control our whole thing. So we'll say if user dot, oh, sorry, not, we don't want to do that. We want to say if, no, we want to say, remember this returns a user, right? So we'll say user uh, returned or result. We'll say if result dot, or if result equals to null, or we'll say if the result is not equal to null, we'll say J option pane, everything was successful. So we'll say null user successfully logged in. Else, we'll say J option pane, show message dialog, null user not logged in, right? And we want to go back there, and I've also realized that I don't want to do this. Instead, I want to print it out, or print the full stack trace, or the full stack trace here on the console. So I'm also going to remove that. I'm going to say sql dot, print stack trace. Going back there, and now we'll finally run this. So we've done a lot of things. Hopefully this works, which I believe that it will work. Now we'll add a username. We can say Joshua123, and the password can be the same thing, Joshua123. And when I say register, nothing is happening because remember we haven't registered our event listener. etn register dot add action listener, and then we pass in this. Now we'll run it again. And we'll say Joshua123. We'll say Joshua123, and we'll register. And it says user successfully logged in because everything went smooth. Now, when I run this, selecting all that, we'll see that Joshua is here. Everything was successfully added to the database, right? So that's how you can simply register users in. Also, if there's an error, it's going to return an error, right? So yeah, now it's time to log users in. So we can click on cancel, right? So now we're gonna need to go to the login. Okay, the login GUI seems fine. Nothing needs to be changed here. We can go back to the domain and create another method. Sorry, not the domain, the user DAO, right? We go back to the user DAO, and here we're gonna log user in. So we'll say public static. Should this return a user? Okay, let's make it return a user for now. We'll see later on. We'll say login or log user, and this will also take in a user object, and we'll return a user for now, right? So now what's going to happen is we we will first register the driver. I'm not going to write that code over again. I'm just going to copy paste. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste all of this here. Also this return null thing, also going to copy that, and I'm just going to change a few things. So what we're going to change here is how we go about yeah, we're going to change that, and we're going to remove this. Right. So what we're going to do is say statement dot execute query, because we're trying to make a query here. We're trying to select items from the database because we want to select everything, right? So we'll say select everything from is it user DAO? Yeah, user, sorry, it's users. And this will return a result set, right? Also, I realized that I actually forgot to close these. Okay, I'm going to close all of them later. I forgot to close the connection statement, but don't worry about it. I'll close it later on, right? Also, the result set needs to be closed as well. That's also something to know. Anyway, import that, and we'll say while rs dot next, right? Because this is what we're going to use to loop through the rows, and we can say if we can say if rs dot get string, is it username? It's username and password, right? So if the username equals to user dot get username. Also, yeah, we're comparing two strings, so that doesn't look like a nice way to code. So we can say dot equals that, and rs dot get string password dot equals, we just put this on the next line, user dot get password. Now this type of query that we're going to do here will give rise to a few problems with SQL injection, but for now, don't worry about that. Maybe we're gonna talk more about that on another video, but for now, let's just focus on logging the users in the easiest way we know how, right? So we can say if those values match, then we can maybe return the user, right? Or else it's gonna be null, right? Which means that the user has not been logged in. So we're gonna go back to register. Actually, not register. We're gonna go back to login, and here in login, we're gonna first register the event. We can say btn login add action listener. This, and we should be fine. I want to go back to register and copy a couple of things. Username, password, user DAO, add user. Right. Actually, I want to copy this whole thing. And what I'm gonna do is, instead of add user, we're gonna say log user, as in the same user object, and then we'll check if result is not equal to null, then user successfully logged in. Actually, yeah, I actually made a big mistake here. Instead of logged, I should have said registered. User successfully registered. User not registered. Yeah, and then here we'll leave it as it is. It's user successfully logged in and user not logged in. Right. So now I think we are ready. It should be able to detect whether or not the user that I'm trying to log in is or exists in the database, right? So if I enter something incorrect here, like something that doesn't belong to the database, and I try to user not logged, it says user not logged in. And I've also realized something here. That register button, I realize I'm going too fast here. This button should have been log in instead of register, but it's fine. Right. So we'll say something like that. And as you can see, it says user not logged in. But if I add the correct credentials, if we go back to the database, we want to see which users we have here. It's Joshua123, Joshua123. That's pretty much the easiest user we have here. So we'll say Joshua123, Joshua123. And when we click on login, it says user successfully logged in. So that's basically how you log users in and register users in here in MySQL. I mean, in Java, we're using Swing. So if you want, you can add another frame so that when the person's logged in, they can be transferred to another page, right? Maybe we're gonna do more of that later on, but for now, I just wanted to show you how you can do a simple login and registration with Swing. So I think that's it. And if I have anything else that I want to show you, I will definitely make a video about it. And also, if you guys want me to share anything or show you how to do anything, holler at me down on the comment section and I'll make a video about it. For now, I'll see you next time.